A survey out today gives a different perspective. The Centre for Macroeconomics, which groups leading economists from top universities in the Bank of England, polled its experts on the austerity policies of the coalition government. 2/3 of the 33 economists disagreed with the proposition that they'd been good for the UK. Amongst them was Simon Wren-Lewis, Professor of Economics at Oxford University. I asked him for his reaction to the question, which was whether the austerity policies of the coalition have had a positive effect on aggregate economic activity in the UK.
My initial reaction was whether the question was a bit of a joke. The reason I had that reaction was because it's pretty clear that austerity policies had a negative effect on the UK economy. The only question really is how big a negative effect it had.
Well, of course, the coalition government would argue that they really didn't have any choice, and if they hadn't carried out those measures to consolidate public spending, then the country would have paid the price, particularly in terms of higher borrowing costs.
There's really no evidence that that's true, and in fact, if you look at interest rates, they were at historic low when the austerity policy came in. So there's no real evidence for that idea at all.
Charlie Bean, former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, in his response said that the UK consolidation was never undertaken in the belief that it would boost demand directly, but that it would reduce the likelihood of a loss of market confidence in the UK government's economic policies.
I think it's probably true that there were a number of economists around 2010 who, seeing what was happening in the Eurozone, essentially panicked and worried that it could happen in the UK. I think there were good reasons not to think that at the time, and indeed I did argue it at the time, but I think now we know that that was clearly wrong. What was happening in the Eurozone was a very Eurozone problem and was never going to happen in the UK.
So how much GDP do you think has been lost as a result of the government's austerity programme?
The Office of Budget Responsibility has estimated that austerity reduced growth by 1% in both the first 2 years of the coalition government. Now, we didn't get any recovery from that in 2012. The economy was still flat. So you can kind of get a minimum figure there that GDP, the total GDP cost of austerity was about 5% of GDP, which means about £4,000 for each household in the economy.
And so what are your thoughts about what kind of austerity measures there should or shouldn't be after this election in the next Parliament?
The big mistake the government made, I mean, the deficit has to come down at some time, and the question is, when do you do it? And the mistake was to try and bring the deficit down sharply when monetary policy couldn't offset its effects because interest rates were stuck at their zero lower bound, as the economists say. So that was the nature of the mistake. And the problem is that interest rates are still at their lower bound. And so to have another period of austerity after the election is just as foolish as it was back in 2010.
So when you look at what the Conservative Party's plans are for the next 5 years, are in effect, are you saying that they're falling into that same mistake that you characterised?
Yes, I think they're taking exactly the same risks with the economy that they took in 2010. The big difference is that in 2010 there was this air of panic because of the Eurozone crisis, but there's no panic now. So really there's no excuse this time for making the mistake, particularly as they'll just be making the same mistake as they made before.
Simon Wren-Lewis.